Welcome everyone. My name is Tim Burris, and today I want to talk about expanding your models, a pattern for including related models in your service calls. What do I mean expand your models? Let me first kind of set the stage for the type of entities we're going to be working with. When I do these demonstrations, I like to use real-world examples of how I've actually used these patterns or these ideas in my applications. I could go and build out a very simple two-entity kind of demo project that shows how it works, and there actually is a lot of value in that. There's not as much noise around it, but I prefer to show how things really get implemented, because sometimes it gets dirty and nasty, and that's just the way things are. So we're gonna go through a couple of real world examples of expanding our model. So first, let me set the stage for the models we're going to be working with. So this is for a custom CRM that I built for a client, and in their CRM they have this idea of an opportunity. So an opportunity is almost everything in this application, but you can imagine this is like a sales lead, for example. So they have this idea of an opportunity, and the first stage of an opportunity is that it's a proposal. So an opportunity is going to have 0 or 1 proposals, and then those proposals will often have many line items. And as an opportunity moves through stages, after it's done with the proposal state, that same opportunity, the same opportunity ID, will get a quote. So an opportunity would have 0 or 1 quote entities associated with it, and each quote will have its own set of line items. Now, these quote line items are not the same as proposal line items. They're completely separate. So, and then after a quote, an opportunity would go to a service agreement, and it's very similar to a quote in that there will be 0 or 1. I'll just do SA for service agreement, and as you might imagine, each service agreement has line items. Now, actually, I'll add one more thing. There are a few more stages even after this, but we'll stop there. And I'm actually going to jump back a little bit, because while each quote has line items, each quote also has 0 or more manager reviews. So when in this system, when a sales rep submits an opportunity quote, the manager has to review it, and they might reject it and send it back, and then it would need to get reviewed again. So, and the same thing occurs for service line items. So this kind of gives us an idea of the model that we're going to look at in the code here. So a single opportunity, as it goes through these different phases, might have proposal, quote, service agreements, and each of those child records has its own set of reference data. So now, with a basic kind of understanding of the model, what do I mean about expanding your models? Well, what I'm talking about is when you're writing your code and you have an opportunity ID, you might want to go out and get that opportunity record, but you at the same time might also want to get a proposal and its line items for that opportunity, or you might need to get the quote and its line items and its reviews, or maybe you only need the opportunity. So what I'm referring to is how a pattern that lets you from the consumer side easily tell the service, these are the additional data points that I would like to get. So now we'll jump into the code. And before we jump into the actual models, I do want to call out one thing. So when you talk about optionally including these, some of you might think, well, I'm using the Entity Framework, I can already do that. And indeed you can. So in the Entity Framework, you can include your referential data all you want. But What I'm talking about is in a system where you're using layers to abstract things. So in this particular application, I have my Blazor web application here, and it communicates only with this business layer. And this business layer is the one who's responsible for communicating with the data layer to actually get the data out of the database, which might be through a micro ORM or entity framework or whatever it is. But the point being that the models that are exposed from this business layer are very similar to the tables that are in your data layer, but they're not identical. They're similar, but not identical. So you can use the entity framework. It definitely has a place in this for expanding. But when we talk about expanding, our Blazor web application does not have access to the entity framework. So I'm going to start with the quote model. That it's a bit more simple than the opportunity itself. So we'll just start with the quote model, and this is how I would expect my models to be laying out if I'm using expansion. So I have my quote, I have properties that are on my quote that make sense to my quote, and then I would have an enum of expansions. And this is where I, for each type of model, decide what things are important to expose. What are the important things that I might want to get when I get a quote. And it may not be every single related entity in the database. Sometimes there's going to be things that you're just very seldom going to need, and you should just go out and get those individually. And you can always go and get these line items individually. The idea of this expansion is things that you're going to very often need. And in fact, I would say probably 75-80% of the time that you get a quote, you're going to want the line items with it. Not all the time, but most of the time. So rather than having to always get the quote and then do a separate call to go get the line items and do a separate call to go get the reviews and all that, you can just, we'll get into it in just a minute, but we're defining that you can optionally include these with the model. So we have our enum. This says what you're allowed to optionally include, and then in this region are the properties where those would be. So if we've asked for the list of line items, then we would expect the line items to be instantiated and populated. It could be instantiated to an empty list if there are no line items, but if we have not defined the expansion for line items, then we would expect this to be null because we didn't choose to include it. So by showing the model, maybe I got a little bit ahead of myself, but this is what the model looks like. And then, well, how do you actually use those expansions? Well, we'll jump over to our iQuote service. So this would be the interface that defines how you can ask for quote data, and here you'll see this get method where you can get a quote by its ID, and you accept a parameter array of expansions. So again, those expansions were here. So that means when we call get, we can pass in either null, nothing, or line items, or reviews, or line items and reviews. Now, if you remember from the drawing, the quote is not really the main record here. It's really the opportunity. The opportunity is the big boy. It's really where most of the application targets. It targets the opportunity, and then sometimes it wants to quote. So this is a very simple demonstration, the quote model, and now we're going to jump over to the opportunity and see what a nasty one looks like. So we'll hop over to the opportunity model, and just like the others, just like the quote, we have some properties that are things describing this opportunity, and for opportunity we have a massive list of expansions. And I'll say of all the times I've used this expand model, this opportunity is probably the most crazy, the most expansions. I've never included this many, but I felt it was quite useful in this project because there are dozens of pages that use opportunity data, and it's all over the place as to what you need. Sometimes you need everything. Sometimes you need just all the things for a quote. Sometimes you need all the things for a service agreement. Sometimes you don't need any of that. So this was what worked best for the opportunity. And so these are the things you can expand. And then so we would expect there to be a region down here to say, if you've elected to expand any of these guys, this is where you'll find them. So I didn't model all this out, but there's different locations, like a billing location, a pickup location. But we also should see the quote in here. Yep. So this is where the quote would be, and if we asked for the quote line items, they would be in there. The service agreement would be here, and if we asked for service agreement line items, then they would be on that model as well. So this model is a bit more complicated than the quote, but it's real world. This is what happens sometimes. So we've just looked at a couple of models that show how the model has described what you're allowed to expand. And let's look at the opportunity service. Opportunity service. And what we'll see is that every time every endpoint or every method that we have that lets us get an opportunity or a list of opportunities or what have you, each one of them will accept in a param array of the expansions you want to allow. So if you're getting it by ID, you can choose to expand. If you are doing this query, if you're finding them by company, sales rep, whatever, doesn't matter. You always accept in this array of expansions. And what I like about this is then it's up to the opportunity service to decide, well, how can I best fulfill all these expansions? It's not up to the consumer to decide, it would be best if I went and got them this way or I went and got them that way. You can have a dedicated expansion service, which we'll jump into in just a moment, that handles, well, how do you fulfill this request for these different expansions. But for right now, let's just take a look. So it looks like get is used all over the place, 23 references. Let's see if we can find some that make use of these expansions. Well, we were just talking about quote, so let's see what the quote page is doing with it. So we go to the quote page and we can see that it's going to do a get, it's going to pass in the opportunity ID, and this particular page says that along with the opportunity, I need the contacts, I need the company location, I need the quote, and I need the quote line items. And that's to be expected because we're talking about the quote page. This is where you would maybe view or edit the quote. I'm not sure which one this is, but you're going to have an opportunity ID, and you're going to need to go get this related data all in one call, and you let the service worry about how is it best to get the quote line item. Now, of course, there's nothing that would stop me from just using my quote service directly and going and getting the quote, and then once I got my quote back. Get I don't know, where's my quote ID? All right, quote ID. We'll just pretend like I have it right here handy. So there's nothing to stop me from getting my quote, and then also going to get my line items. Let's see if I have the line item service in here. I do. Awesome. Get. That's just getting one. So is there a get, a find? Oh, get for quote. There we go. So also passing in my quote ID that is somewhere, but whatever. I mean, there's nothing to stop me from doing this, and it's not really that much more work. But when we look at all the different things we need, and then we'll what if we have multiple quotes? What if this is not just one quote, and our opportunity service is finding not just one opportunity, but we're getting all of them for a company, and then you also need all the quotes for all of those opportunities. That's when it starts to get a bit tedious in terms of doing these direct calls to get the data. So the only thing I'm saying is, it's not like this is the only way, but it's a pretty convenient, handy way, and you can put all the optimization for how how it gets those related data items inside of a service. And so, the purpose of this video isn't really to show, well, how do you implement all that expansion? It's really to show, well, what is it? But just fun, we will go and let's go look at the quote expand service. This is what I would expect everything that I've written that has the expansion to have an expand service. And so we come to our expand service. It has probably should have looked at the definition first so you can see how it works. It has an expand models, takes in a numerable of models. This might be one quote, it might be 1,000 quotes, and then the list of expansion. The actual implementation of that expand looks like this. Some basic boilerplate up front. Did you ask for any expansions? Do you have any models? And if so, this is not great, amazing optimization. But the first thing we know we need to do is maybe they've passed in the same model multiple times. We're just going to go get a distinct list of quote IDs that we need to expand on. Then we're going to go through all of their list of expansions. If they've asked for the quote reviews, we are going to use our data repository for quote reviews and say, find me all the reviews for all the quotes that they're looking to fill. And is this the most optimal? Maybe not, but because I know there's never really more than 2 reviews for a quote. I'm not worried about performance, but for this particular one. So I'm going to go and get all the reviews, convert them to my business models. Probably a whole separate video about the concepts of converting from your data models to your business models. But we'll just assume that that's good, and then we are going to we're just going to go through our models and put all the reviews onto all those different quotes. Same thing for line items. Probably should have went with line items because that makes more sense. Quote reviews. We have our line item repository. We go and get all the line items for all the quotes, convert them to our business models, and then we're going to go and group them by their quote ID so that we have nice lists of line items broken out by the quote they go with. Make it a dictionary so that we can quickly find them. Then we're going to go through all the quotes they gave us and say, here's your line items. For quote, the first quote, go get the line items. Now, the great thing is, if we are expecting millions of records or hundreds of thousands of records or whatever, then we can optimize this routine. We don't have to just go and find it like this. This works great for this model, but I suspect there's probably some places in here that I've done some optimization because of the type of record I'm getting. And that's where I feel like the power is. It's in your hands to control how you want to optimize going and getting these expanded elements. So I suspect the opportunity expand service is probably going to be something you're going to judge me on, no doubt. But we're going to go there anyway. A bunch of stuff. So remember that opportunity is like the Mac Daddy. It's the top. It has everything. So there was a ton of opportunities. And so again, no reason for me to dive into all of the details of everything that's going on here, but just noting some performance things. It looks like the first thing I'm going to do is create a lazy list of opportunity IDs. That's because it most likely some of the expansions need a list of opportunity IDs and some don't, and I don't know up front whether or not I'm going to need it. But if 5 of these expansions need a list of opportunity IDs, then the first one will cause it to go get the list, and then all the others will benefit from the fact that it's already computed on the list of opportunity IDs. And so when we jump down into the expand, much like the other one, we start to see things, what's going on. So opportunities, there could be a ton of opportunities. I'm gonna stick with quotes and service agreements since that's what we've talked about. So I'm going to go down to the quote area, and so I have this threshold where because we know there can be so many opportunities that maybe finding all the quotes by the list of opportunity IDs is not that's going to be a really long query, so maybe that's not the most efficient. So if they're asking for less than 2,000 opportunities, then I'm just going to go and get those opportunities, a query by that. But if it's more than that, then I'm going to go ahead and go get all the quotes, and then I'll worry about piecing them together. Now, that's because I know, as the author of this code, I know that typically whenever we see more than 2,000, we're doing a full data dump of all the data. So, but that's the beauty, is it's completely in your control how you decide what the best way to go and fill these expansions. So, the same things for these other ones. So again, purpose is not to say, did I write the best code for expanding? Probably not. But the purpose is to show that your models can describe what's allowed to be expanded. Your service can allow you to pass in your optional expansions, and then your expand service can fulfill those requests to fill all that data. And so another thing that I like about this pattern is, in this particular example, this is just a Blazor web application communicating with a service, a business layer communicating with a data layer. But this works great in an API as well. So if we wanted to put an API in front of this business layer and expose all this data through REST, then we could still use the expand pattern and have it fulfill those REST requests using expand. In fact, I'm going to switch over to another application, an API, where I'm doing just that. And so I'll do a very small amount of scene setting for this application. In this application, it consists of an API, a web application, a desktop application, and some other things. But the idea of this application is that users use a mapping tool like ArcGIS or Google Maps, something of that's embedded into the application to draw and track things. So a couple of entities that are important that we're going to go over is one of them is a scenario, and that's really the top for what we're going to talk about. And that would be a bounding box drawn on the map, and then within that scenario or that bounding box, they could have multiple areas. So an area might be a building. So a scenario might be a state, say the state of South Carolina, and then within that scenario that they've drawn out, they might have a bunch of buildings or areas, maybe counties, and then within those different areas, they might have what they would call occupants. So an occupant could be anything from a person to a vehicle to a dog, whatever they want it to be. So we're going to just stick with this very simple hierarchy here, that a scenario contains 0 or more areas, and an area contains 0 or more occupants. So with that in mind, we will go to our API side, and we'd expect there to be a controller exposing those different entities. So we'll go with the area controller. So if you remember, an area can have many occupants, but it also might have a parent, or will have a parent scenario. What I expect to see in my REST endpoint is something like this, which is on my get that I would accept in the ID, and again an array of expand. And so from a REST API kind of viewpoint, this would look like you would have your base URL, and then this would be area / whatever the ID is, which is a GUID, and then because these are coming from the query, we would expect something like expand. Well, why don't we check and see what we can expand? Probably should have done that first. But so for an area, let's look at the different expansions. So we have our area model. We have basic properties that describe it, and then we have our enum of things we're allowed to expand. So we can expand and get the scenario, which would be like its parent record, the current slant. I'll talk about that in just one moment, but not really important. We could get a list of all the occupants that are inside. That would be like the men, the women, the children, the dogs, whatever's being there. And then something that's not even a foreign key, but something that is often quite useful, which is this statistics model. And so just covering real quick what these two are. A slant is something that this application uses very commonly to say for an area, you almost always want to know the breakdown of occupants in that area. So five men, 3 women, 46 children. So that's what they call a slant. So usually when you're asking for an area, you're going to want to know, well, what's the breakdown of men, women, children, and dogs in that area. So this is one of the optional things that you can include. So and then I would expect, down here, a region that is where I define those properties that you would optionally be able to return. So back to our controller. So let's get this so we can see both of these side by side, so that we can see what we're talking about. So if I were making this API call, I would have my base URL, area ID, expand. Let's say I want the scenario, and I want the occupants. So that's what a URL might look like from the REST endpoint, to say, give me the area and also give me the scenario and the occupants that go with it. Now, optionally, I could just say, I don't care about anything. I just need the area data. I just need that base level data. So, your URL to get that would just be as simple as that. And so in using this, you can cut down on the number of API calls that you need to make when you have common sets of data that you're very often going to want to get. So that's really all that I have for this session, just showing how a pattern for how you can implement optional expansion in your layers, so that you can include data that you often need to get at the same time, and have the power to optimize that on the service level however you want, without all your consumer always having to figure out, well, what's the best way. I have 50 areas, what's the best way for me to go and get all the occupants for all those areas, and things of that nature. So I as always hoped that you enjoyed this video, and have a wonderful day.